Okay, this is for my Year 10 students. Now we're thinking about the Inspector Calls literary essay. I've done a video on context, and I've done a video on applying context, rather, and then on the actual most complex essays, which would be the Inspector Calls, the role of the inspector and the role of Eva Smith. Now today I want to think about what it means to look at the exemplars that we have in this book and what we need to do to write an effective essay. So to start off, I really want you to think about what does it mean to move from the reading practice to writing an essay. You've done this before, You've done this before, but I want you to really consider that writing is not natural. It's something you have to practice. And what that means is writing journals, taking notes, getting your own ideas out of your head and making them visible. If all you do in English is try to do an approximation of what you think the teacher wants, you're missing a really important aspect of the activity, which is what do you actually think about the play? I say this to all my students that, the number one way you actually will improve in English is if you actually read and actually write and practice those skills. If you want to make real gains, you're going to have to do that. You're going to actually need to think about what you're doing. This isn't simply a mechanistic activity. And you got to write those ideas down, whatever you think. What is Priestley trying to say or reveal? How does it make you feel? And if you're functional, if you're taking some of these ideas, but you're actually very located and I just want a good mark, I would recommend you revise each character. What are the key quotations for each character? What are the key ideas for each character? The internet is flooded with materials for this. And you should start revising those key moments, key quotations, dramatic conventions, mostly dramatic irony, structural change over the course of the play, and of course, as we've talked about, revise the context. So that's it in brief. Please read the play, make notes. Today we're going to read some exemplars, and you've got to really spend some time on figuring out what makes them good to move on to the next stage in your writing, which is creating a literary essay. When you have to do this in the exam, you'll do it under timed conditions. Okay, so in this booklet that we've given you, we have this essay on using social historical context. I've invited you into writing this big essay on the inspector if you need scaffolding, Eva Smith if you're feeling bold. But in this booklet, what you have is a number of the exemplar essays for characters, Birling, Mrs. Birling, and Sheila, and 2 for themes, social class and selfishness. What am I looking for in a successful essay? Okay, so let's just read through this really carefully, and then I'll go back to my PowerPoint. We really need you to address the question, what is actually being asked of you? Okay, so if it's a theme, you want to offer me, you want to define, what does this mean, social class or selfishness? Unpack, explain this idea. Don't just tell me, try to explore and make sense of what these ideas mean. If it's on a character, the main way to think about is the character change over the course of the play and their relationship to other characters, particularly Eva Smith and the inspector, because they're the linchpins of the whole play. A thesis is an overall argument, and what we're trying to get you to think about is 3 arguments that accumulate to one bigger thing. So that's a great introduction would kind of outline your main thesis for what you're arguing. You could use context, but you don't need to. If you're really on it, you can already start to evaluate how well weigh up how well does Priestley use this theme or character. What are the failings? What are the things that change? Ooh, let me closer to my mouth. Sorry. Okay, so from there, we have 3 paragraphs I'm looking for. And what each one should have is something like the topic sentence or your interpretation, a variety of relevant evidence. So we want to use unusual, different evidence. It's got to be relevant. Relevant means it links to the theme or the character. It can't just be random quotations. It is a closed book exam, but you're at home, so this relevance should be something that is very present. Ultimately, we want you to integrate the use of evidence. So we don't like the phrase, a quote that shows this. We like you to draw it into the prose itself. And then we would like to see you analyzing language, form, structure. Okay, what does that mean? Well, language means keywords, relevant devices, the actual language of the play. Form, this is a dramatic play, so we're thinking about stagecraft, character, dialogue, stage directions. The dramatic irony is the main device. How's the audience feeling and thinking when they're watching this play? Structure is the aspect of change, whether it's in a scene itself or over the course of the play itself. So an easy way to analyze structure is this idea of before the inspector's arrival, during the inspector's interrogation, and when they think him fake, and the ending. We want context, so that context needs to be, if it's relevant, it needs to be explained and applied, and we've done a lot of work on context. You should go back to that work. And what we're looking for is exploration of analysis, making sure that it links to your argument. We don't want a history essay. We don't want randomness embedded here. You could think about the multiple contexts of the imagined setting of 1912, the actual time the play was performed in 1945, and your current situation in 2020. What we'd be looking for in advanced answers is personal responses. What we could look for in a very advanced answer is the idea of evaluation, that you can see it in more than one way and weigh up which is the best way of looking at things. And at the end of a paragraph, we like to RTQ, return to the question, which is a way of going back to the topic sentence. Basic would be a repetition of the topic sentence. Advanced would be an extension or development of that. So what you would have at the top and tail of every paragraph, I should be able to read your essay and look at the first sentence and the last sentence of every paragraph and get your overall argument and answer to the question set. Okay, so let's just go continue. So this is the process. Don't forget that what I've just described is what the actual essay looks like. Well, how do you get there? Well, you got to do stuff. You don't just get out of the gates and start running and you're going to arrive. That's why students are confused about why they're not making progress. You've got to do things to get to the point of learning to write well. You got to practice it a lot. And now that you're at home, you've got to spend some time doing these things if you're going to prepare for a literary essay. Okay? So this is just another version of the success criteria for the actual essay itself that I want you to think about. Okay, so let's look at this character, Mr. Birling. Now, this one's from the exam board. I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Here we go. Ultimately, what we're looking for, if you're writing a Birling essay, is, well, how is he shown in the beginning? How is he shown in the inspector's interrogation? How is he shown afterwards? An advanced essay might look at Birling's relationship with all the other characters. Oops, no, I didn't want to do that. Hold on. Okay, what I did want to do, let me just see if that still works. Oh, okay, just give me a second. Oh, goodness. I hope this is going to be okay. Okay, I'll come back to you in a second. Let me just, let's move over to the actual essay. So we're on page 8 here, and what I'd like you to look at is any paragraph, but I could do one with you. I'm going to pick one at random. Mr. Birling's reaction. Now this is from the exam board. I'm not fully happy with this, but let's just take a look at how we could interpret what's happening. Look, by the way, that's an introduction, a very short introduction. They say this is a perfectly competent piece of writing. Mr. Birling's reaction to the inspector being a fake, his simple dismissal and excuses that I would have noticed, can also be seen as portraying the capitalist views after the war, a confidence such as Mr. Birling had in Act 1 to the excuses given, much like those after the inspector leaves. That is way too long and too confusing for me, but ultimately what is interesting is using context for the topic sentence. They have some evidence. The inspector leaves sorry, I've lost it. Priestley has easily portrayed Mr. Birling as almost the dictator of the family. That's an interpretation. However, after the ordeal, this changes quickly. Here we have structural change. I'm ashamed of you. This clear portrayal of views on Mr. Birling shows how opinions are changing, possibly to show the increase in socialism support since the end of World War II. This places Mr. Birling in a weakened position, leading to the belief that the inspector's influence of socialist beliefs has a positive and morally beneficial effect on the younger generation, in order to suggest that socialism could be the best option for the future. So what this writer's done is they're using context and audience reaction to analyze. I don't know how successful this is. Let's take a look at the second essay. Again, we're on page 9. This, the exam board says, is a more successful essay. Priestley also presents Mr. Birling to be very close with his family apart from Eric. As a really clear topic sentence, we're using the author, we're focusing on Birling, and the focus is right there on Eric. This is revealed by the quotation, "What about war?" This shows how Mr. Birling shuts down his son and also debates against Eric's opinions or statements. The punctuation shows us that Mr. Birling would have shouted at him, further reinforcing how weak their relationship is. I'm not a fan of punctuation analysis, but what they're doing is they're trying to explain, they're trying to analyze how the language reveals something. We can also see how close Mr. Birling and Gerald Croft are, due to the fact that they are both share capitalist views. When Mr. Birling finishes telling the story of Ava Smith, Gerald Croft supports Mr. Birling. This is revealed by the quotation, "There's nothing he could have done." The word "nothing" implies he's trying to show the inspector there isn't a solution, no choice. We can again see the relationship between Eric and Mr. Birling by the... Okay, so here we have evidence, we have context, and notice you don't need to do that much for context. You have zooming into words and phrasing, so this seems like a more successful paragraph. We can again see the relationship between Eric and Mr. Birling by the quotation, "He could have increased the wages." The word "could" reinforces the weak relationship due to the fact that it shows Eric not supporting his dad, but the inspector. Not only do you zoom in, since it's a play, you're not going to really squeeze that word "could" very much. So what you've really got to do is explain, and they've done that quite well. Priestley also presents Mr. Birling to be socially inferior to his wife. When his wife complains against his husband for complimenting the chef, this revealed by the quotation, "You mustn't say these things." The word "mustn't" shows Mr. Birling's attitude towards others, similar to Mrs. Birling's uncaring. I'm a bit confused as to the relevance of this, but I know what they're trying to do, which is to emphasize his uncaringness. So I put a star around the relevance because I'm not really happy with that. But what we see is the second paragraph is a little bit more traditional. Now let me go back to my PowerPoint and see if I can make it work. Play from current slide. Let me see if I can get this working. Oh gosh, is it not going to work? It's okay if it doesn't work. But I want it to. Let me try one more time. One more time. There we go. Okay. Now we're back. Okay, so, sorry about that. Let's look at the Mrs. Birling essay. Again, from the exam board. I'll pick a page at random. Let me see. Let's do page 13. Okay. When Sybil finds out that the inspector is a hoax, so here we get that structural awareness. She instantly forgets all that happens that evening and goes back to what she was doing earlier on. By showing no remorse for Eva Smith, Through the character of Mrs. Birling, J.B. Priestley is suggesting that there is no chance that the higher class can change to be able to have equal rights and equal morals. See, up until that point, I was worried that it was going to be storytelling. But that is a topic sentence. That is an interpretation completely. And it's advanced, actually. He speaks to his audience through the voice of the inspector when he says, "We are all members of one body." This states that we are the same kind. We are all human beings, so everyone needs to treat each other. So we have evidence and explanation. So everyone needs to treat each other equally, and everyone needs to treat each other as they would like to be treated. Priestley contrasts Mrs. Birling's character with Sheila's to show that there is hope for the younger generation. Character, relationships. Good. This is evident when Sheila says, "Between us we have killed a girl." This shows that Sheila feels strongly guilty for her actions and shows remorse, but Mrs. Birling doesn't accept this. In fact, she criticizes Mrs. Birling for not interrogating the inspector from the start or letting her question him at the start of the evening. This emphasizes how Mrs. Birling has behaved throughout the course of the play and shows that she has not changed one bit. Here we have explanation, approaching, evaluation. Yes, Hannah, you can come in. And intentionally made the character of Mrs. Birling unlikable to show that there is no hope in the older generation. They intentionally made the character of Mrs. Birling might be a really good way to think about Priestley doing things on purpose. And that for me is AO2 form, character, and audience reaction. Audience reaction. Okay, so these are exam board examples, and they don't follow necessarily a pattern directly, and that's again why you need to spend some time looking at exemplars and figuring out what those exemplars do. If you really want to do well, one thing you could do, because these are all top-end responses, is you could reverse plan them. You could take from the essay, you could identify the topic sentence, the evidence, the analysis, the context, and you could turn it into a reverse plan. And what you'd start to learn is, how are you going to write your Inspector Calls essay? Okay, let's take a look at the Sheila essay. These are actual LPS students. So let's see how they do things. Priestley presents Sheila as a character who learns important lessons about herself and society by showing her as a well-mannered girl. So that is a clear author question interpretation. Topic sentence. In Act 1, we know that the Birlings are celebrating Sheila's and Gerald's engagement. When Gerald gets the ring, she says, "It's the one you wanted me to have." The phrase, so here we have evidence, zoom in, implies that she depends on men, and from the impression of the tone, it comes off as if she is saying it in an innocent manner. This can highlight. Can is a really interesting word. Okay, tone is AO2 form, how people speak. Can is analysis and modality. Possibly, might, suggest, could. These are ways of you saying it might possibly mean this. It doesn't absolutely mean this. And what this does is it really facilitates more ability to explore and say more. We can see that she's following the etiquette of how women were supposed to behave. Context. Elegantly integrated. Also in the beginning of the play, we don't hear much more from Sheila, showing how, as a female in the play, she was expected to keep quiet. Again, integrated context. Mr. Birling, on the other hand, has a lot to say, and he's speaking to Gerald about the business world. He also repeatedly tries to insult socialist writer and even the community as nonsense. Relationships with other characters. This implies that he is very self-centered and doesn't think about anyone but himself. At the end of the play, we see how he still hasn't changed when he says, "I'll have to cover this up or as quick as possible." This highlights how he has no sympathy for the situation and only cares about how he's seen in the eye of the public. He thinks it's vital for a man to have a good reputation. So here we have a big conversation about Mr. Birling. Is it off topic? Could be, except for this. Links back to context and theme. The questions I should have said is, how does Priestley present Sheila as a character who learns important lessons about herself and society? So we're back to the role of women. During this era, women of higher class were expected to be polite, not say much and get married, whilst women of the working classes were just used for labor and were mistreated. We see how Sheila's manner contrasts with Mrs. Birling's whilst talking about Ava's death with the inspector. Contrast. Character. Good. That's what we're looking for. Thus, Priestley presents Sheila as a character who learns important lessons about society and herself. Now look what they've done. They've done the RTQ, which is a repetition. Okay, not ideal, but that isn't bad. That's what a paragraph should somewhat do, which is at the beginning and the end, give me an argument. So this student, who did really quite well in this exam, what they've done is they've built their argument. They're very clear about how they're answering the question. They're relating to other characters, and they're linking in context. All really strong. All really, really strong. Okay? So I'd advise you, if you want to learn more about how to write these essays, that you spend more time looking at these exemplars. You have another Sheila essay in this book that follows. It's very different quality. But then after that, we move to theme questions. So we're going to look at a theme question on social class. When you have theme, as opposed to talking about one character, it's good you talk about as many characters as you can. And then an advanced answer would also mention the inspector and Eva Smith as well. So I'm just going to really look at one of these, and then I'm going to end for today. You should spend some time looking at these exemplars. So the question on social class is, let me just find the question. Oh, I don't have it. It is on social class, though. Priestley presents the importance of social class through Mrs. Birling's speech, attitudes, and ideas. So here we get a topic sentence that focuses on the theme and uses one character. Mr. Birling is related to us as a hard-headed man practice a business, which shows he is a typical factory owner in 1912. He is a member of the middle class, and Priestley shows how he will do anything to access the upper class, even if it means giving away his daughter Sheila. Here we get again context used to analyze, explain, unpack, link. He is concerned that Sir Croft and Lady Croft couldn't attend the party, as all his capitalist mindset enables him to think of is protests and his social status. For example, his knighthood. Evidence helps with examples, and they're relevant. Priestley presents him as foolish. We see into the mindset of capitalist, and Priestley enables the audience to see Mr. Birling's passions, wealth, and social class. Socialism versus capitalism was a main part of 1912, as laborers revolted. Priestley was trying to encourage his audience towards socialist views and to see the error in capitalist ways. So, again, what this student's done is used context to further their analysis. So strangely, what we're not seeing too much is the traditional type of analysis. Let's see if we can look at another one. Let's see this one. I'm going to pick, let's try this. Social class is presented, sorry, I'm on page 40. Social class is presented as a selfish, traditionalist, exploitative system. That's a rather intense interpretation. Priestley presents this classist reality through Mrs. Birling. Here we see that sometimes a topic sentence needs 2 sentences to get there. Character focus. She attacks Ava Smith in something manner and describes her being girls from that class. Immediately, Priestley presents the something of the audience through the use of that, linguistically connoting derogatory feelings in the basis of his social class, an egoistic something. This would have been, look at that. Zoom in. Even on a word as banal as that. You can't do language analysis, but you can explain it. This would have condemned by contemporary audiences quite the relevant something war effort where the United Nations, regardless of the background, defending Britain. Priestley here portrays that the something of responsibility is the out of selfish ways which can lead to the mistreatment of others. Wow, really sophisticated for the audience of 1945. What this writer has done is just with one simple quotation, girls of that class, and by zooming into just one little simple word, she exploits an entire interpretation. So whereas we can't necessarily do sophisticated language analysis always, we do still think about the process of zooming into language and thinking about audience as means of getting other types of analysis going. Okay, so if you want to really learn how to do this, you should look through this booklet and look at the other exemplars that look at selfishness, and you should go through every essay and identify as many of the success criteria as you can. And what you'll start to see is you'll start to figure out your way of writing an essay. Okay, to conclude, to write a character essay, what you're trying to do is talk about the overall change of a character, the relevant context. The structure is before, during, and after the inspector. And to stretch, you're going to talk about character relationships. If you're doing a theme question, you want to know Priestley's treatment of the theme overall, the relevant context, 3 characters and the relationship to both the theme and Ava Smith. To stretch, you do characters and inspector, and to really stretch, you do character and relationships. So your homework is to do the prepared essay for inspector and Ava Smith. But what we would do next is a timed essay after Easter on a character. You could do a timed essay if you're up for it at home, but maybe you could do a prepared essay on one of the characters. The super stretch would be, if you really want to know inspector calls backwards and forwards, I'd recommend that you prepare a character essay for each character. So what we've done today is we've reviewed how to write a literary essay as much as we could. I've gave you the example of what you're supposed to do, and I've talked to you about what it means to use the exemplars that we've given you, to read them closely. I haven't been able to do it in as much detail as I wanted, but I gave you some examples of what I'd like you to be doing. I hope this is of some help. I hope you're joining the Google Classroom, and I hope you are getting on with your studies under these incredibly difficult times. See ya.